started immediately, and we're going to start with the very first presentation. And I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Roland Gauß from EIT RawMaterials. Yeah, you can clap. Roland is the Head of Innovation and Business Intelligence at EIT RawMaterials. He will speak about digitalization and sustainability in the rare earths value chain. He pretty much leads the initiatives around advancing innovation and business intelligence in the raw materials sector at EIT. He's got a PhD from the University of Tübingen. And his expertise is really around metallurgy, resource criticality, and the development of sustainable materials. And prior to joining EIT RawMaterials, Roland held roles at Marie Curie Research Fellow at the University College London, and also Head of Department at the Fraunhofer IWKS. And we're really looking forward to your presentation, Roland.
Thank you. Do you have the clicker?
Yeah. I'll give it to you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm very grateful to be here. I think the title, the topic of the conference, the ambition of the conference is really spot on. These are talking about digitalization, sustainability in raw materials. These are really key driving factors for our industry. Now, I represent EIT RawMaterials, and this is a public-private partnership and so-called knowledge and innovation community in Europe, and we are focusing on promoting innovation, education, and business creation in the raw materials sector along the full raw materials value chain. And I'm focusing today on one of those most frequently cited critical raw materials, which is the rare earth value chain. Now, these rare earths materials become really increasingly more important for Europe. I have here now with me the statistics for Germany. So imagine 20% of Germany's value add is actually depending on rare earths and rare earths containing materials. You see this in this slide, this figure here, 161 billion euros depending on these kinds of materials. Total production value is 500 billion euros, and then a significant amount of jobs directly linked to these sectors. This is, of course, particularly going into the automotive industry, but also we're talking about equipment manufacturing, we're talking about chemistry, different kinds of electronics and optical products that are directly affected by this kind of materials. Now, on top of that, we have significant imports of these materials in the context of products that are imported to Europe. Yeah? So this 248 billion worth of products containing rare earth imported to in this case, Germany. And then on the other hand, and that is the fascinating point, the entire market for rare earth permanent magnets, which is driven by neodymium iron boron, only has a value of 20 billion euros. So you see this leverage effect of a niche market affecting large parts of the industry. And now we did an exercise with our innovation community to scale and say, hey, what would it take to build a European, resilient, sustainable value chain in Europe, serving 20% of the rare earth materials demand in Europe? And it boils down to 2 billion euros. Yeah, so it's really the length scales of these different numbers, I think, are telling. Yeah, so we're talking here about a value chain stretching from the mining of rare earths, the processing, the separation, the metal making, the alloying, the strip casting, the magnet making, and the different recycling steps attached to it. So the question is, what does it take to make this a resilient and sustainable value chain? Now, the tragedy is that 14 years after the rare earth crisis of 2010 and 11, signaled here by this price peak, in 2010, 11, 14 years later, we're still, as Europeans, fully import dependent on these low-cost Chinese imports. That is all along the value chain. You can see here the domination of Chinese rare earth oxide extraction and processing, and this peak really coincides with the moment of highest production concentration worldwide. Now you do see a differentiation and let's say, other jurisdictions opening up for mining. The challenge is that most of these materials are actually then shipped to China for further processing. So we are really, in terms of, if you think about sustainability, resilience, and diversification, still depending on a very, very highly focused and concentrated production in Asia. And this is also reflected by this map published by the German Institute for Geosciences and Raw Materials, Resources, BGR, showing the distribution of rare earth mining sites in orange and also in brown, and then advanced exploration sites in blue, and the few processing sites that we see worldwide. Now again, this is put in the context of a world governance indicator map as provided by the World Bank. You can see again that most of these, let's say, running projects are actually distributed in places with a poor world governance indicator. Again, in terms of sustainability, in terms of resilience, this is really a challenge. And this is even, I mentioned the mining, but then if you look at the processing sites, only very few are actually outside of China. We have some in India, in Japan also, in Europe, but actually there's none, not a single one, that is capable of processing heavy, so-called heavy rare earths at an industrial scale outside of China. So a huge gap, a huge challenge, but also an opportunity, to invest and grow and to do something about it. Now, this triggered, particularly about the last 2-3 years, a significant investment and a significant activity in the US. You see, when you consider this rare earth value chain, considerable projects all along the value chain that have been promoted, that received actually a public-private investment going forward. If you think about mining in California, you could see about a separation here in Indiana, but even our most valued company, Vakuumschmelze in Germany, is currently not investing in Europe, but actually investing in South Carolina in close collaboration with the automotive industry to build up a new manufacturing plant. So you see there's something moving there, and particularly, of course, even Donald Trump knows how to spell rare earth and is looking into this topic. There's some movement going on. Now, when it comes to the environmental sustainability of rare earth and rare earth-related products, we face a real issue, because there's, as I told you, there's this value chain which is highly concentrated on only very few players, results in the fact that there's a total lack of transparency on the real environmental footprints in these production sites. There's some data on here, kilogram CO2 equivalent for 1 kilogram of neodymium iron boron published in literature, but how realistic these are and how, let's say, deeply grounded they are in actual industrial practice remains to be shown. And we'll come back to that later in my presentation. One thing that does come out is there is nothing. There's not this one answer of saying, a rare earth magnet has a bad environmental footprint. It really depends how you source it, how you calculate the footprint, and also if you choose primary raw materials versus using secondary raw materials, recycled raw materials. And one of the key step forwards that we need to really get our head around for this value chain is to understand much better where is your specific material coming from that you are using for your specific product, how is it treated, which processes are used, and to understand these complex supply chain networks, and then use this data to then also respond to new requirements when it comes to digital product passports and to let's say, an elevated expectation to really document sustainability as we're going forward in this green transition. Now, this is where we come in as EIT RawMaterials. We are, as I mentioned before, this public-private partnership in Europe. We have 300 members that are actively participating in our partnership. We've been promoting more than 800 startups in the sector. We collaborate with more than 350 universities and have an extended partner network through our European Raw Materials Alliance, counting to more than 750 partners. And then our, let's say, approach is to really promote innovation, education, business creation all along this value chain, from extraction to processing to materials design, recycling, the circular economy. We're also looking into advanced materials, how we can optimize them, how we can resource efficiently design these materials. And how do we do this? Through our network, we provide access to knowledge and innovation, very concrete solutions to your specific industrial problems. We have active calls providing public-private financing for projects. And here I'm talking about startups, but we're also talking about collaborative projects where we have academic people working with industrial people together to really drive innovation and move things forward. So we have kind of along the full range of technology readiness, we provide solutions. And many people forget this point here, education and skills. For many of these sectors, we're actually losing talents, or we need to really ramp up educating people and make people get fascinated about this sector, which is so vital for our industry. And then, of course, we have networks and events where we bring people together and support matchmaking and business creation. Now, looking into the very specific opportunities that have developed over the last few years in rare earth in Europe, you can see a number of projects that are quite promising. Across Europe, we have a couple of mining sites that are promising. You've seen the announcement by LKAB, Finnish Minerals Group is developing a project. We have the Neo-Performance Materials separation and magnet making plants being developed in Estonia. We have a project in Poland on the separation of rare earths that we are supporting. We have RETEC with a massive announcement 2 years ago about a significant investment in rare earth separation. We have deposits in Norway here at the so-called Fenn area, Fenn complex. In Germany, we have, next to Vakuum Schmelze, we have GKN Powder Metallurgy investing into a magnet manufacturing pilot plant. We have Hypermag, a startup. And in France, there's a major activities going on in France in this value chain with Carister investing into a heavy rare earth separation plant, Solvay, Mark Resources, a startup, and Orano as a big player coming from the uranium business, actually moving into rare earth raw materials processing. And we have supported several of these projects. We have equity investments here or supported technology development or stakeholder engagement. And some of them actually received this status of a strategic project label. And this means from the European Commission point of view, these projects have a particular support when it comes to permitting and going further, looking into the future, potentially also for financing, but this needs to be demonstrated and seen. Now, the other key point that we've identified through all these years, looking at critical raw materials value chains and rare earths in particular, we learned it's not enough to just look at individual projects, technology, promote startups. We need to look into the boundary conditions that we do business in Europe here. Yeah? If we don't change those framework conditions, we will not regain leadership in terms of sustainability, in terms of business in these value chains. So it's crystal clear doing this stakeholder engagement process in the context of the European Raw Materials Alliance. We identified 4 key pillars and more detailed actions, which I will not show now, but it boils down to 4 key pillars of recommendation that needs to happen to have these smaller projects that I just mentioned really grow sustainably. And that is, we need to ensure we create a level playing field, to have these companies really have a fair business competition with other players worldwide. We mentioned tariffs. the subsidies, all these things. These is what we have. These industries are really facing as a challenge. We need to drive a commitment from EU OEMs to purchase from these European projects, at least a share of their demand, in order to get the commitment, in order to get a kind of a risk sharing across the value chain. We need to ensure that end-of-life products containing these materials, not only rare earth, but also in other sectors, really stay in Europe. So we incentivize a circular economy. We do not only talk about circular economy, we incentivize it and we create a market for it. And we need, of course, provide CapEx support to trigger investments to then lower the cost of capital, of course. And particularly for this field here, to create this level playing field, to look into standards and to really create transparency in this value chain, we've been investing as EIT RawMaterials in a number of projects and startups. You all know Metals Hub. I don't need to go into detail here. We've also invested into very exciting startups like Circularize and MindSpiders, using blockchain technology to trace raw materials, to track raw materials and related data all along the value chain, and really helping to understand what are the real CO2 footprints that really accumulate along the value chain. And then we have Minviro, you hear later a presentation by Robert, the founder of the company, developing an ecosystem, an industrially based LCA analyses that really help you to understand what you're actually sourcing. And then we actually try to cross-fertilize these startups and bring them together. We have a collaboration between these two in a particular project called CRS, where they try to connect LCA in rare earth extraction and processing with a supply chain monitoring and blockchain technology. So with this, I would like to close. I would like to thank you for your attention. And I would also like to warmly invite you to join our community to really benefit from our services, and also highlight that we actually have a number of open calls for proposals, for financing projects, but also for inviting experts to join our community to evaluate, contribute with know-how. Yeah? So thank you very much.
We are opening up for questions as well. I can imagine that there are quite a few. Maybe let me start with that. There's always, we value very much the collaboration with EIT, bringing together really experts and knowledge across the industry. But what we see always is that the perception of raw materials industries, etc., in Europe is not very good, at least when you talk to the public.
Yeah.
What is Europe, what is EIT doing to change actually this perception? Because if you don't have a positive image, everybody will say, not in my backyard. I know we need all phones, but please not in my backyard.
Yeah, well, you pointed the finger in one of the most difficult points. When I started in 2016, we were talking to DG Grow, the economy unit at the European Commission, and we were really kind of, this raw materials was just really this tiny little topic they had under the major economic challenges that they face. Now it's been growing enormously, and what do? We position the topic, of course, at the Commission. We have regular exchange with top-level decision makers in Brussels, but of course we have a number of, let's say, the approach is to really reach out to people on various levels. So we have the policy makers that we consult regularly. We have our big events where we inform about the topic. We have particular educational courses, master and PhD programs that we are co-financing. We even have programs at schools where we educate kids. We have materials that can go to schools to educate children about the topic. So we really try to approach at the different levels of educating about the topic. And last week we actually received a green light to launch a real big project in education, the so-called Raw Materials Academy. Extra funding, extra opportunities to promote this topic in Europe.
Thank you. With Markus, we'll start with the live questions.
Let me be the icebreaker here. Yeah? Roland, great presentation. I'm not a specialist on that, and probably many in here are not. But what is astonishing, every metal or material starts with mining. Mm-hmm. Are there really no deposits of rare earth in Europe? Because what I've seen from there, we are processing, we are recycling, but there is not a single mine in Europe. And is it really all in these few countries you had, which is China, USA a little bit, nothing in Europe? No. Or is it just simply not economical to mine rare earth in Europe as well?
Yeah. No, that's a very obvious, good question, and that's the answer is very clear. There are deposits in Europe that we can develop economically. In this one map that I showed about the European projects, we have it did show some of the deposits, like in LKAB in Sweden, for instance, in Norway. Finnish Minerals Group has a project. There are in Spain. We have projects. It's all about the willingness to really invest, to be comfortable, to accept a few extra costs to mine it in Europe. The controversy, the funny thing is that even though we don't mine rare earths in Europe at this stage, we are still a leader in terms of technology provider. So we have companies that actually provide technology to other jurisdictions in the world and tell people how to extract and process these materials. Yeah? So it's really up to us, and it's really not just the sector in the specific, but really us as a society and as the value chain to say, yes, we're willing to mine and we're willing to co-invest and provide off-take agreement for some of those projects that are developing in Europe. Yeah?
So there is no economic business case at the moment without state or EU support who would make sense?
At the very moment, not. At the moment, not. Yeah.
Thank you.
There are also a couple of questions digitally, and another one here. Maybe in the meantime, while we go to the next one, do you think Europe can catch up? I mean, if you don't, then
of course. I mean, I'm here representing an innovation community. So we have all the right ingredients to do so. But it's about commitment. It's about taking this seriously. Okay. Because you asked about the business case. This market is so dominated by one single player that if you develop any kind of business case, a few days later or a few weeks later, and if you start the business, the price will drop by a dominant policy-driven price dictation from another side of the world. So it's up to us to develop some sort of stamina to say, yes, I don't need to source 100% of my rare earth from Europe, but why don't we source 20% of our demand from European sources or friendly shores, as we say, other jurisdictions that work closely with Europe, and then the extra cost that comes on top is only a fraction if you consider the entire supply chain. Yeah? It's about diversification, it's about offtake, it's about commitment, and yes, we can catch up. Absolutely.
There's a personal question here.
Yeah, hi, Andreas Papst from Kofaming Group. You were talking about that you were instrumental or assisted in a number of projects getting the EU critical, what was it called, raw material status? Or
strategic project.
Strategic, yeah, that's right. Sorry, my question is a bit long-winded.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, when the EU critical raw materials report came out, identifying what's important, what isn't, in conjunction, or a bit of a shocker from that report was that they were looking at projects, particularly mining, but also then later refining, and they were highlighting how difficult it was from the moment you identified a project to the point it actually produced the first ton and making a return, and that being 10 years plus, which was a shocker compared to the rest of the world. So now, a couple of years on, we have this status that we can assign to projects. But what does it mean, actually? I mean, what's the real bang behind that in reality? What's the benefit for a project, or is this just a paper title?
The real bang, first of all, is that the Commission at its highest levels has recognized that we need this. But we need to talk about strategic projects in mining and processing raw materials. That's the big bang. Now, I'm also totally with you. Now that we need, for us, it's doing the business. The question is, what does it mean in terms of big bang, in terms of business?
Does it help to put hurdles aside? Or
yes, and that's what I'm trying to come. So the aim to really focus on particularly facilitating permitting, have easier access to finance through the EIB, for instance. Now, many projects tell us we already had contacts with the EIB. We are looking for grants or other things. Yeah. This will. Let's see what happens there. Remember that this is a this is really a ongoing process now, yeah. And I think it's important to be on the list, to be recognized, and then as we speak, things are happening. The world is turning really quickly these days. And next to these European sites, there's actually an addition of strategic projects identified in Europe, in countries that have a partnership with Europe. Yeah, this comes even on top. And we are having, for instance, as an example, concrete example, we have a big project called the Critical Raw Materials Facility, where we help European off-takers to meet those projects in all these places around the world. Yeah, so things are moving, and I think it's a good first step, but more needs to come.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think that goes probably also into the direction of one question around regulation and major red tape. I think this is major red tape, bureaucracy around that. That's probably also what I learned.
Yes.
You're aiming at reducing for those strategic projects, right?
Absolutely. And the challenge is, of course, but if you consider Germany, for instance, I mean, the ambition with the Critical Raw Materials Act is to get a permitting time of several years down to 2 years, which is incredible. And we do not even have a European mining law. We don't have a German mining law. We have regional mining laws. So to get all these people on board is a challenge. But it's good to have ambitious targets and to have it recognized as a challenge. And I think it will only help us to move forward. But the key point is not to stop here. Yeah. We need to have a strong, let's say, indication also from the off-takers to say, yes, we want to have some share of a local production, some local supply chain, yeah? Some share of a diversified supply chain. Yeah? And if this is signaled also to the decision makers in policy, I'm sure we're moving ahead. Yeah.
I think recycling plays a role there.
Absolutely.
You mentioned we need to make sure that those resources stay in Europe.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an interesting question, which we'll probably also debate later at the recycling panel. How do we make sure that on the one side, raw materials stay in Europe, but at the same point, don't do the same mistakes as others and say, hey, we just put up walls left, right, and center, and we still are promoters of free trade.
Absolutely. This is a balancing act. I can just tell you from other sectors, I mean, I'm talking about rare earth. Let's talk about aluminum. Let's talk about steel scrap. There's a global, really, race for these scraps because you have if you use them, you reduce your footprint, and it's economically makes sense. But actually, I learned from people in this business that, particularly aluminum industry, for instance, they have difficulties to keep that aluminum scrap in Europe for their units. So how do we deal with that? Just to leave it to the market? I don't believe the market alone will fix it, to be honest. So we need to have a balancing act here, where different players come together. Yes, good market conditions, but some restrictions we need. I feel. I don't know if you like that answer as a trader, but
well, we're not trading.
No, but as a platform here.
Yeah.
But I think it's a balancing act. It's not. There's no black and white answer. Yeah. I think you see a question.
Questions? Yeah. From the audience.
Martin Polczek, thanks for the presentation. You outlined perfectly that the supply chain and the value chain is quite complex. It's capex heavy, 3-digit billion euros or dollars to go in to have a refined product or single oxide at the end. Do you consider also a much more pragmatic approach to have like a physical reserve on the ground of Europe to be able to, like an intermediate solution, you know, because once you're getting there, you're so vulnerable from the situation out of China with export controls. Do you considering this to orchestrate this as a European body?
Absolutely. I mean, we as EIT RawMaterials don't have the mandate, but the Commission is definitely looking into stockpiling. Obviously, this can only be a puzzle piece, right, into a more bigger, broader, resilient solution, because you need to be able to process these materials, right? You need to shape them into products with very specific specifications. So it can, from my point of view, can only be one piece of the puzzle, but it is very concretely, they're very concretely looking into that approach. Yeah.
I think that was also related to the question, like the DLA America is.
That's my question.
I thought so. I think there's one more question from the audience. Tokta?
Hi, Dr. Turbe from LME. I remember looking to this market of the rare earth, and one of the things that struck me back then is that the mining of this thing, as you show on the map, there's a lot of mines, a lot of different deposits around the world, but there are very few processing facilities. And I was wondering whether that's going to be a bottleneck in terms of the technology or sustainability perspective, whether it's going to be a major issue, major factor as an obstacle for development of this in value chain.
Absolutely. So this is what I pointed out. Even if we have more mine sites opening up worldwide, most of them are almost exclusively delivered into Chinese processing units. So we need to diversify along the value chain. Yeah? We need to have this diversification in the mining sites and also in the separation and processing sites. And here we see a really good development in Europe with Solvay and Rhodia plant, has the longest history of separation in Europe, opening up again, investing. We have Carester investing into that in Europe. We have Neo Performance Materials in Estonia. So we have some processing separation capacities being built up. We also have the academic excellence here with players like even in Aachen and Leuven and different players in Europe that have the capacity, understanding how the metallurgy works. Yeah? So I think we have some good, let's say, good growth, yeah? But we need to really further support this. Yeah.
I'm just mindful of the time.
Yes.
What is exciting that there are so many questions. I've seen conferences where there were one or two stage questions. So I think that's great. And it shows that there's a huge interest actually in the work that you guys are doing at EIT and what it means to Europe and the industrial base in Europe. Roland, a small present from us.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And once again, super interesting.
Thank you.
We're looking forward to hear more from you guys.
All right. Thank you very much.